Welcome to 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages. Empowering women like you to amplify your voice, your message, your movement. We believe that if 10,000 new women stepped into high-level leadership platforms, we can transform the industries across the planet. 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages. And now your host, Nerissa Street.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for tuning in to 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages, where we are here to help you use your voice to get your platform amplified. My name is Nerissa Street, and I am so happy to have with us today Ana Tadjer. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. We were just chatting a little bit. My son is in a summer camp, and since he's been doing this, he's been the happiest child in the universe, and that makes me the happiest mama in the universe. And I finally get to do some work. So this is amazing.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that. And I can appreciate that as a mom. You would be concerned about your beautiful, beautiful child's well-being. So tell our audience a little bit more about yourself. Please tell us about yourself.
I am a book author and a journalist, originally from Croatia, which when I was born was part of Yugoslavia, a country that does not exist anymore. It broke up in a very, very bloody war, which is known as the Balkan Wars in the 90s. And this is when my mother and I escaped Croatia and moved to Vienna, Austria. I was 17. And I experienced what I really do not wish anybody to experience, which is running into a basement during an air raid, waiting to be bombarded.
Wow.
It puts a different perspective on life. So I stayed in Austria. It was the funny part of that story is that we believed that everything will calm down in a few days. It didn't. The war went on for another 4 years, and I stayed in Vienna. I learned the language. I continued school there and finished my university there. I did my MBA and worked at the United Nations in diplomacy for 4 years. And then I had a career in corporate world. I was,
wow. Don't wait. Hold on. We can't just jump over that now. So you went from Vienna, really escaped to Vienna. And then in Vienna, started to learn the language when you realized that you were going to be there for a while, and then stepped into a career of diplomacy. So talk to us about that. How did that happen? And then we'll go into the corporate world.
That happened because Croatia at that stage was a new country. Mm-hmm. So, it was opening diplomatic offices around the world. And a friend of mine, and I cannot remember how, she had a job at the Croatian mission to United Nations as an assistant there. And for some reason, she wanted to quit this job, and they were looking for somebody else. And I applied and got the job. And this was amazing because this is how I financed my MBA. And I worked there for 4 years as the assistant to the ambassador. And it was amazing. It was like a startup because the country was new and everything was so fresh, being admitted to United Nations as a country. And it was a fantastic new period for my country and for me. And I worked with just the most amazing team in the world. I still grieve for that team. We were a tiny team of 7 people and just amazing, amazing diplomats and great people and great atmosphere.
So you moved from that when they made the transition. That sounds so amazing. As you say, a startup, but like a country startup.
Yes, a country startup.
That's amazing. So you moved from that, and then I guess when how did your team, shift and transition, and then you get into corporate? How did that happen?
So what happened is I finished my MBA, and I was young. I was 20. I think I was 23, and I was ready to conquer the world. I decided for myself, which now I'm glad I did, that I do not want to go into diplomacy because I cannot move every 4 years. I get very attached to my surroundings and people around me. And as much as diplomacy looks amazing, I know that kind of life would not be good for me. So that I didn't want to do. And having finished my MBA, I wanted to conquer the world. And the funny story is, back then, my dream job was to become a CEO of Disney Studios.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I was like, okay, now I have my MBA. I'm going to become the CEO of Disney Studios.
Wow.
Yeah, fun. I am also glad I didn't do that, because after having spent 8 years in Hollywood, with my husband is a screenwriter, having learned more about Hollywood, I'm like, wow. Either I would be eaten alive or I would turn into a beast I don't want to be. So
wow.
Yeah. So the first step to becoming the CEO of the Disney Studios was I was headhunted and sent to another kind of startup, which was the region's largest mobile phone network.
Okay.
And this was the 90s, where the mobile phones just started.
Right.
And that was yet another amazing experience, because yet again, a startup feeling, and everything was so new. Mobile phones were new, the products were new. We were creating this whole new industry, and it was quite an interesting field. And I managed to work myself up I worked there for 7 years. I started as a project manager, and I worked myself up to become a international marketing expert. I was doing strategies for our 7 countries. So I had a helicopter view, and I was, which I just love. I love this very international, multicultural aspect of seeing how different countries and different cultures work, and what kind of products and services do you need in a different country.
So like diplomacy, but in the corporate world.
Yeah. I loved that job as such, like work, but the environment turned out to be not good for me. I am not a corporate person. Okay. So sitting in those big offices from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then doing, business dinners and just and the backstabbing and the kind of elbow pushing of the corporate world turned out not to be very healthy for me. So I kind of burned out there.
Okay.
My body and my mind decided this is not good for me.
Right.
And I'm very proud now when I look back that I had the courage to recognize that, my doctors claimed I was just depressed and should take antidepressants and go back. And my intuition told me that's not good, because I burned out because something's wrong. Some kind of this constellation is not good for me. So I, with support of my mom, did collect the courage to dig deep inside and learn who I am and what I need and why this was not good for me.
So let's go into this just a bit, because it's amazing, as somebody who, first of all, was extracted from a war impacted area, found yourself into a space of diplomacy where you then could feel a sense of control over really the trajectory of the country that you loved and you came from. And then moving into what everybody would think was a dream, like the corporate world, and climbing your way up. Help some of my audience understand what the burnout feels like, so that they can look in themselves and say, okay, well, hey, maybe that's what I'm feeling. So what did it feel like when you say, hey, I'm here 8 to 8, great work that I'm doing, but what was the feeling?
It started gently at that job with just not being happy, not being able to find happiness and fulfillment, and being very tired. And it's funny, I accidentally came across an article about burnout, and then I wrote to the psychiatrist who wrote this article, and I said, this is what I'm experiencing. What do you think? Should I find help? And he said, you are at the early stages of burnout. You should either get help or change your job. A change helps in this situation. So this is when I thought, okay, I'm going to change this and go into a more creative world. And I moved into an advertising agency. But weirdly, it proved that the advertising agency, the job there was less creative than my job in a mobile phone network, where I was dealing with creating these new strategies and products and things. And this is where I really, really burned out. For me, it was quite dramatic. One Monday morning, I drove to work and I got into my car and started crying and just I cried for 3 days. I just couldn't. And the only thing I could say was, I just can't anymore. It was this feeling of, I don't have another word, but just, I can't, nothing. Like, I can't anymore. I need to rest and sleep. And it was interesting that the doctors and psychiatrists were trying to convince me it was depression, but I just felt it's not depression. I was just tired. I just felt like I need a big good rest, and I need to figure out something new for me that will not exhaust me to this extent. I think I slept for 3 weeks. But I literally, like, I slept, I just slept through for 3 weeks. This is how exhausted I was. And then I did feel depressed, because suddenly you're so tired that your whole world kind of crumbles down. You're not able to function anymore. But, I was lucky to be in Europe at that time, where we do have sick leave and unemployment, and we have this safety net that catches you in these moments and gives you time and support to recover and become functional again.
Well, I think also it's interesting that the doctors who were with you were saying, oh, it's depression, as if depression's okay. Like, it's like, I'll just take a couple pills. Everybody gets depressed. It's all right.
But that's the trick. That's the trick, because they have the pharmaceuticals, and they have a solution for it. Whereas burnout is not that easy to heal. And it's so easy to prescribe medication and put people on medication and make them feel better. But I've learned through that how too hastily these things are prescribed. And for me, it was funny. I knew nothing about antidepressants at that stage, but somehow my intuition, I asked them, okay, if I need these tablets to feel better right now, how do I get off them? Like, if nothing else changes in my life and you give me some medication, then suddenly I'm all happy. When do I get and how off them? And why do I not get depressed again? Because nothing else has changed in my life. And they didn't have an answer to this. And this is where I was just like, it just doesn't feel right. It didn't feel right to me. It didn't. And I'm so glad that it didn't, because I dived deep into this thing. Like, I dived to the bottom and learned how it feels and learned to push myself up again without medication or other substances.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to, first of all, connect to the person who wrote the article about burnout, but then also just to recognize, and I hope the audience hears this, recognize that there was something in you that said, this isn't right. And trusting the part of you that says, this isn't right. And on top of it, what I like to teach with my work is, if you feel that something isn't right, then there are options, right? So I think we make some decisions based on the thought that there are no options. Like, well, they said let's prescribe some pills. Well, that must be it. But if your intuition is saying to you something isn't right, then lean into it. It might just mean you may not have the answer immediately, but there is an answer. So
at that time, I discovered a school next to my house, and it had this big sign on it that said, if you're an apple, don't try to be a banana. And that for me became the life motto. This sign was so important for me at that moment, because I've learned that I'm playing somebody else's game, and that's what's destroying me, But my lucky circumstances in this whole thing was that while still at work, I started writing. As I always say, writing discovered me. I had a very fun neighborhood, a house full of very fun young neighbors. And one Christmas, I started writing down our stories because I wanted to make little booklets of our stories and pictures as Christmas presents for everybody.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And I did that, and I couldn't stop writing. I couldn't stop writing. And this is what became my first book. So writing turned out to be the most amazing feeling I've ever had in my life. Just sitting down every day after work, I would come home at like 8 p.m. and sit down on my computer and work on my book. And every weekend I would work on it. And it was the happiest I've ever been. Wow. And this helped me then to recognize when I burned out that there is this kind of fulfilled work, a work that where you feel just so blessed and happy and, completely fulfilled by it. And this is what helped me and gave me the courage to say no, thank you, when it was time for me to decide, okay, am I quitting my job or not? And I decided to quit the job and to see if I can survive as a writer.
Right.
And I did, the first book came out, and then the second book came out, and I started writing for magazines and newspapers. And for me, a big lesson here, and I'm sorry if I sound too kitschy, like a spiritually kitschy person, but for me, that was a very beautiful learning, that when you find who you are, and when you dare to go towards that, when you collect the courage to throw away other things. And it was hard, as you said, to throw away this, big corporate career. I went through an MBA to do that, and earning money and traveling around. But to dare and say, no, I'm going to try follow this real me. It was amazing that the doors just started opening up for me magically. It was crazy. The first publisher I sent my manuscript to said yes. The first newspaper I sent my article, it wasn't even an article, it was some thoughts, and I sent them this, and I said, maybe we could talk about me starting, to writing for you. And they emailed back, and they're like, we want to publish this in our next issue. Things just started opening up, once you're on the right road, once you've started following yourself.
Yeah, but first it took the courage to go, and
it does.
And I really want to acknowledge that's a lot of people are kind of on the edge, right? And yes. So there is that safe place, because a corporate job where you get to travel and you're creating things and all of those kinds of things, it feels like the right thing to stay with. It feels like the responsible thing to stay with.
Yeah.
And yet, when you stay there, imagine yourself as the mother who is burnt out, trying to be a good support system for your son. And I think people don't really, they feel like they can take on this pain and this depression or whatever on behalf of other people because, okay, it's okay, I'm going to be providing. But what you're really missing is the type of person you're going to show up as when you're depressed, when you're burned out, you know, and that's the thing that is really, really most detrimental. It's not the financial things. And then what's great is the financial success will come. But, you know, as you say, when you're an apple, don't try to be a banana, right?
Yeah. But I also learned through that I was never as happy as when I quit my job and I just lived on my unemployment. You know, I suddenly went from from a fantastic salary into the tiny little benefits where I really had to, when I met my friends for dinner, I was just drinking. Like I wouldn't eat, you know, it was, there was no shopping but I've never been as happy. And that was also a great lesson that we don't need as much as we think we do, actually, you know. We do need basic safety, but we need to be happy more than a lot of money.
Yeah. And I think that's also an identity conversation. So the folks who listen to this podcast are people who are taking a stand. And by stand, meaning it's something that's important to them and they're using their voice, right? And I think a lot of times we identify with the ways that we show up in the world. And when all of a sudden you realize that it's not making you happy and your role shifts and and the title that you had before is no longer the title you have, there is a conversation about, well, who am I now? You know, so how did you, when you were doing the shift, when you were dropping the corporate title, and you said that your mother was helpful with that as well. When you were dropping the corporate title, how did you work through that transition, whether it was a grief transition, whether it was how did you work through that?
You know, my both parents are creatives. My mom was a movie actress and also a painter and a graphic designer. She had two amazingly successful parallel careers. And my father is an architect. And for them originally, and the funny thing is I chose to go into management because I back then said to them, I don't want to be a broke artist. I thought I wanted to earn money. And they were very shocked with that decision because, of course, they saw me. I grew up being always pushed into that creative field. But they supported me. They always, supported and respected my decisions. Right. So when this thing happened with the book and my burnout, and I said, look, I'm going to take some time off and see how writing is going for me. My dad, who is a more rational person, didn't like the idea of quitting an awesome job for this. But my mom was very, very supportive in that. And she was very excited that I am coming back to the creative roots, So that was very helpful. Having come, I think if my parents were managers, maybe it would be much harder, but this, it helped that I came from that kind of a world. And,
was that first book, that was Tita Land?
That was From Barbie to Vibrator.
Okay. Beautiful.
Those were short stories about young ladies growing up. But I'm sorry, you'll have to cut my pause because I lost my thought.
Okay, you were talking about your.
You know what really helped? What surprised me was when I started introducing myself as a book author, which took quite a lot of courage to dare to say I'm a book author. It sounded so exotic to me. I got the most amazing reactions from people, and it was interesting that. I was shocked that just a few months ago, I was this, international strategic marketing, strategic planning professional, earning all this money and traveling around the world. And when people asked, what do you do? And I said, what I do, it was like, And now I was broke. I was broke, but I was a book author, and everybody was like, wow, that's amazing. That helped a lot as well to ease into this new life.
I think it's interesting that people think about that is everybody is when I've written a book and I've traveled here and all those other things. And I remember when I published my book and I said to somebody, well, I published a book, and they're like, oh, you published a book.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how, as a young person, even the thought of pursuing the creative field, they still in schools, and they're changing that now. But I remember in schools, the thought of pursuing a creative field wasn't necessarily lauded. However, people always respect the courage to do those things, as if it's not something that they should be doing. But so it's interesting that after the book published, that people were starting to affirm for you what you already knew for yourself. So so talk about the second book as well. So you have your first book and then your second book. Tell us about that.
So I had my first book out there, and then came 2007 and the financial crisis, and we started discussing. Everybody started talking about how capitalism is dying and communism is already dead, and we need an alternative, and what's going to happen. And I grew up in an alternative. What people don't know is that Tito's Yugoslavia, was a country that was positioned in between communism and capitalism. It had its own version of communism that was very open. You could own your businesses. Our borders were open. We could travel to West and people could come to us. So we were a kind of a open communist capitalist country. We were a mix. So when 2007 happened, I wrote an essay about growing up in this country that was a mix of communism and capitalism for a very big Austrian newspaper. And somehow this essay got an amazing feedback. They received so many comments and readers' emails. And my publisher, who published my first book, immediately said, please, turn it into a book, a little book. In Europe, you have to write, in Europe, you have to write little books. That's interesting. In America, you have to write big books, but in Europe, they want a little book. So, I turned that into a book, and I wrote a book proposal, and I decided at this stage I needed some new money. So I decided to apply for some book grants. And it was a time to apply for the biggest Austrian book grant, which is a national grant for literature. So I wrote this application and went to my publisher and asked him what he thought about this. And he started laughing. He was just like, I'm so sorry, but he started laughing because he said, this is so unconventional and different. And you can see that you come from a different world. Like, this is not your thing. And he's like, that to get this grant, you should have won many little ones. This is the biggest literature grant in Austria. So he's like, look, it's unconventional. You are not the person yet to win this, but just send it in and see what happens. And I sent it in, and I got it. And on my birthday, and it's so funny because at that stage I was doing some part-time jobs at advertising agencies, and I just lost my job. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to pay my bills? And 3 days later, it was my birthday, and I was quite sad that I'm broke. And I went to my mailbox and opened this letter, and I just couldn't, like, the world exploded around me from joy. It was, that was a serious grant where you get a year of your life costs paid to write a book. This is every writer's dream. So that was, it was amazing. And this is yet again, the story of when you choose yourself, things follow and things open up. So this is, and then the second book came out, and that was a bigger success than the first, partially because I've learned if any young authors are listening, do your own PR. Do your own PR. Don't trust PR people. You're the best person to advertise and sell your book and place it in the media. I think it really, really helped. And the book.
You know what your book is about.
Yeah, and you come from this honest place, you come from a different place, and you will push it as nobody else, you know. So that happened, and yeah.
That's enough. So a couple of things that I wanted to pull from what you were talking about. So number one, the thought of continuing to pursue the work that made you joyful while also working for other people. So I heard that, and I heard that it was a practice for you. So was it a daily practice? So did you did your work, and then when you came home, you spent some time. Okay.
I managed to get a part-time job at an advertising agency, so I would go in the mornings and then go home and write in the afternoons.
Perfect. So I wanted to pull that out because I think some of the audience can sometimes get bogged down in the thought of, okay, I either need to take this huge leap and cast everything aside and just hope for the best. But what I hear from you in doing that is you have your bills to pay, you have to eat on a regular basis. And so taking the time to do both, what I call both the sacred and the mundane. So you have the mundane work where this is what's paying your bills, but then when you come home, it's that sacred time that you're spending on the thing that gives you the joy. And so then when you had this great success, they paid your bills to live for a year. At that time, and this is a more of a technical question. At that time, were you, because I know you're a mom now, were you a mom, or was it just you by yourself doing this work and making the decisions for yourself?
It was just me. My mom, we moved to Vienna, and my mom went back quite soon after, and I stayed in Vienna living with my dad. My dad was in Vienna at the time. So she went back to Croatia, and we've lived separately since I was 17 or 18. She was in Croatia and I was in Austria. But she was an immense support. We talked every day, she was always there.
Oh, beautiful. So
yeah.
So is that how now you became inspired to do your podcast with this relationship?
So the podcast happened because I lost my mom. We were extremely close. My mom and I'm an only child, and we had this amazing relationship where we were really like best friends and sisters, and the strongest support for each other in every way possible. When I gave birth, she came over I lived in Los Angeles at the time. She came over and helped for 4 months, which is the most amazing present your mom can give you. And in 2016, she passed away very, very surprisingly. She was in a great shape, and she was always healthy, and everything looked amazing. But then she started coughing and feeling worse. And it took quite a while to figure out what it was. And once she was diagnosed, I think it only took 8 weeks, and she passed away. It went so quick. It was just, it's okay. Thank you. And that was extremely hard for me. Because we were so close, and she was such a big help for me in every single way. I really found myself standing on this abyss, looking into this black abyss, and thinking, if I didn't have my child right now, I'm not sure how I would recover from this. Wow. I really wondered, how am I going to go through life without her on, And then at one point, one day I remember I suddenly had this panic attack that I was going to forget everything she told me and she taught me. So I sat down and started writing down things she would tell me, lessons and, everything she was trying to teach me. And I wrote it down and left it in my diary. And last spring I had a little health scare and I was thinking, oh, if something happened to me, what would be that one thing that I wish I've still done in my life? And then I thought that would be the book about my mom's lessons. So I sat down and started writing a book about her lessons, which became her biography through her lessons because she really had an amazing life. And working on this book, telling my friends about it, it was interesting to see how women immediately light up when they hear mother's lessons and start thinking about it. For the first time, they're like, oh, what did I learn from my mom? And we would start talking about this. And this gave me the idea to do a podcast, which very importantly for me is global and speaks to women from all over the world, of all different backgrounds and cultures and countries. And also very important to me, not only super successful, I'm so tired of, oh, she's the biggest, most, but just normal women,
right.
Talking about what they've learned from their mothers. And also important to me because it's part of my book, what their mothers were not able to teach them. What are important things in life that their moms were not able to teach them and why? And so this evolved into this beautiful podcast about where we talk about women's lives and we talk about different cultures. We've learned, it's 22 episodes in now, and we're learning about life in Nepal and life in Turkey on a farm and Alevi Muslim culture and all these amazing stories and lives and histories and cultures and women's lives and how their lives influence what they teach their children or don't teach their children.
Beautiful. I align with a lot of what you're saying because I'm very close to my mom, and gratefully she's still with me, and I have condolences for you when somebody is like that, your friend, your sister, your heartmate, so
yeah.
I am very grateful that you did get the idea to capture her lessons. And so talk about in creating that podcast, to honor those lessons. What do you find that you've learned? And it's beautiful how the diplomacy that you started with has had this common thread. You're able to reach out to people internationally. You're able to leverage your ability to connect across global places. So what have you learned in that? Like, what are some common themes that you find in your podcast?
The interesting thing is that almost every single mom, no matter where she comes from and what her circumstances are, is trying to teach her daughter to be independent.
Wow.
And some of them succeed and some of them don't. And this is for me very interesting, why some of them don't, why some of them give into being, stay-at-home moms and but it's interesting that this independency comes so often, and especially is very strongly there with moms who grew up in very harsh circumstances. Moms like, the mom, one of my favorite stories, that the mom who grew up on a farm in Turkey and was not even allowed to go to school, and then managed to send her 3 daughters and was a mom of 3 daughters, which in Turkey, is women are seen differently. She managed to push her 3 daughters through the highest education. Two of them have PhDs. One of them is a molecular biologist in Vienna, Austria. The other one is a lawyer. And she never taught them to cook or clean or do any housework, because she really wanted them to concentrate only and exclusively on their careers and becoming independent.
So for people who don't know, I apologize. Tell us why having a woman having 3 children in Turkey is something interesting, because
you know, it's a Muslim country and women are still, I don't know how to say it politically correct, so I don't step on any bombs, but women are still seen as having different rights and values than men do.
I see.
So, you know, a daughter is less likely to be sent to school, or she has to marry whom you tell her to. Not the whole Turkey, of course, but this is the cliche of, you know, if you grew up on a farm in yeah. So, you know, the kind of cultures where it would be better to have 3 sons so they can take over, because sons can inherit and take over the business, you know, and women are less. Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, so independence is one of the things that keeps on being repeated. It's interesting for me to learn that caring for others and giving to others comes almost only in Catholic families, or mothers showing that as a value and as a lesson consciously. And then as a lesson that moms do not teach their daughters, and the daughters wish they would, what very often is mentioned is sex. Daughters are saying, I wish my mom taught me about my body and about sexuality and empowered me in that way, as one of my guests said, so I don't have to go through trial and error. You don't want your daughter to go through trial and error with that topic, you know. So that was interesting for me, because my mom was always very open and taught me about this. So I kind of took it for granted that moms nowadays do that. And it was very surprising for me to learn that they still don't. And that's a very, very big lesson, I think, for mothers generally, that sometimes they have to step over their comfort zone for the sake of empowering their daughters, you know, and if they're not able, I don't know, you're a teacher, it's interesting to know, are there professionals where you can go and be like, look, I don't know, something, I don't feel comfortable talking to my daughter about sexuality. Can somebody else do this for me? Yeah. But it's a very, very important topic, obviously, for women.
It is, and it is still, I mean, particularly where I am based, I'm based in the U.S., it's very much a taboo topic everywhere.
And it's getting worse. We just watched a movie from the 90s the other day, mm-hmm. 10 Things I Hate About You. And we were so surprised how much more open this was. 20 years ago in the 90s, you were able to still talk about it more openly, and sex was not such a taboo as it is now.
It is an interesting thought, and what is also, you know, as far as I was having a discussion about education, and what we've noticed is that particularly in our country, each state has its own personality, I guess, around that, and so instead of there being a universal discussion about, you know, even just the biology, state by state, things are taught differently. And so even that, it's just a very, very touchy subject. And I'm not sure why. And I understand that there's so many ways that we can empower young people so that they make decisions that are in their best interest, as opposed to, as you say, trial and error. And that, sometimes with it's very, very scary as to the decisions that they can make, because especially now they can go on the internet and find all kinds of information that's completely,
especially now with all this, the access, you have to really, especially now, really very, very consciously explain to children that this is not what they will probably find on internet, is not normal
real, not factual,
real thing,
not real, not factual. That's graphics, that's CGI that you're looking at right there. It's very, very interesting, and without the just without a standard, it'll be interesting to see how it continues to evolve. But I'm glad that you were able to parse that out for and that you have a podcast where women can talk about and really reflect on and really assimilate the lessons that their moms gave them. So
it's beautiful, it's beautiful to hear from my guests how happy they are after the interview, and they just, as they often say, because I made them think about it, especially if their moms are still alive, to think about it. And many of them are like, I'm going back to my mom with so many questions now, it's beautiful because it makes certain things more conscious and more aware to get out of your mom as long as you still have her.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about that myself. So, what would you, so let's wrap and think about some final thoughts here. So you're based right now, because you've been everywhere. So where
I've been everywhere
right now?
After Croatia for 17 years, 20 years in Vienna, Austria, 8 years in Los Angeles. I am now in Seattle for the past 3 years.
Okay. And do you find, so I would say that you found that that's a beautiful place because you have a young person. So
I do.
You and your young person, and you did mention your husband. Or
my husband, yeah.
So, do you find that you can continue to do the work that you're doing remotely? Like you don't need to travel?
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful. This is where the new technologies are amazing, because look at what I'm doing. Every week I talk to women. I'll never forget how I scheduled this phone call, this interview. And I thought the lady was on the East Coast. She was in Kenya. And I heard her so clearly, and I'm like, where are you on the East Coast? She's like, I'm in Kenya right now, and how amazing is that? And I'm scheduling this call with a lady from China, and the world became, through these technologies, such a small place, which has its positive sides, as with my podcast, also negative as with Corona. But it's amazing that I can do this. I'm very, very grateful that I can do this from my office here.
Yeah, and you get to be a diplomat as well. So
it's so beautiful. I've finally, it's funny how I had to become 46 to learn that in a way that's obviously what my life is about bringing different, I call it a translator of different cultures, just bring different people, different countries, different cultures together and maybe even help them understand each other. And this is obviously a topic that started with the international school I went to in Vienna, and then through the diplomacy and everything else, it's obviously what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's beautiful. I love it. I'm learning through Thank You Mama that together we're stronger. I'm learning the power of our stories and sharing our stories and understanding that it sounds kitschy, but that we are one, listening to all these mothers' lives and daughters and these relationships. It's just like we are we are one. We have this common experience of being a human being, of being a woman, no matter where, and a daughter, no matter where we are and what our circumstances are. And that for me, at least, it helps me to feel stronger and happier.
Yeah. And I don't think it's kitschy at all. I feel like more and more people are starting to acknowledge what is the foundation for everything. I'm an amateur scientist, I guess, and I love quantum physics. And the foundational principle of quantum physics is the force that undergirds everything, and it responds to our expectation of it. And that's something that's scientifically proven. So the fact that, you're experiencing We Are One is amazing. So I know you have some amazing stories to share. So tell us where we find your podcast. Tell us where we find you on social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the podcast is called Thank You, Mama, and you can find it on all podcast platforms. Mm-hmm. There's more about me and my podcast on my website, which is www.tajder.com, which I have to spell now.
Sure.
TAJDER.com. That's my second name. And I am on Instagram and Facebook. I'm everywhere, not active everywhere, but under my real name, Ana Tadjer, ANATAJDER. And it's, once you know how to spell that, it's easy to find me.
Sure. I really appreciate, you're having a conversation with us. Love the way that you were able to discuss the self-discovery and how that helped you heal the burnout. And how your life of diplomacy has woven a thread throughout your entire story. And I'm hoping that our audience is able to see a little bit of themselves in your story, and is also aware that their voice can be heard in many ways. So we have you as a book author, we have you as a podcast moderator and host, and you've been a journalist as well. So we really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you for tuning in to 10,000 Women, 10,000 Stages. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Find us at 10,000women10,000stages.com.